Welcome to episode 125 of the Charm City Birdwatch podcast, bi-week edition. Going to be a little bit shorter of a podcast this week, but we actually have quite a bit to discuss, more than we anticipated. We were only anticipating sort of an update to our Steelers game preview following their sixth straight win over the Titans, or sixth straight win of the year. They took down the Titans on Sunday. We were going to give an updated Steelers preview. We still will do that at the end of the show, but we actually have some trade news to get to. Everyone knows that. We also have another potential edition. It's not official yet. We'll get to that. And those will probably take up most of the show because they are the big news of the week. So if you've been living under a rock, since we last recorded, the Ravens did end up making a move before the trade deadline. Just like last year, they've brought someone in to help boost their defense. And forgive me with the name here because I've been practicing since the trade, but Yannick Ngakoue. That's as good as I'm going to get it. So if I'm off there, you're going to have to deal with it. Sorry.
You did a great job. Great job.
He is coming.
A+.
Thank you. I know it's Yannick, not Yannick. I know that much. The last name's still just going to be a phonetic. I got to sound it out. But he's coming back to the state of Maryland, where he played college football for University of Maryland. Believe he was born and grew up in the D.C. area. So this is sort of home for him. And he was a guy that I know they had some interest in the offseason. They were looking to bring him in then. Didn't work out, ends up going to Minnesota, gets traded there, and only makes it 6 weeks in before he gets dealt out of Minnesota. They were extremely disappointing this year. They were looking to be much more competitive, and now they're going to be a bottom feeder in the entire NFL, not just their division this year. So they ship him out and get a couple draft picks in return, a third rounder next year, a fifth rounder the year after. So the Ravens giving up a little bit more than they're accustomed to with these recent trades. I mean, you look at everyone's been talking about it nonstop, but you look at what they got Marcus Peters for, you look at what they got Calais Campbell for this offseason. This is a little bit of a bigger price to pay, but still in the grand scheme of things, 2 draft picks in 2 separate years. It's not like they're in the same draft. And we'll get to this a little bit later with the long-term implications of this trade, but you're probably going to be getting a third-round comp pick back in the next year when a certain someone doesn't get signed. So that will help balance things out if that were to happen. And really, even if you don't, I mean, a third and a fifth round pick for this just right off the top is not that steep of a price to pay when you're looking to go and win a Super Bowl this year and make that one addition that's going to put you over the top. I don't think that's too big of a price to pay. If you can't tell, I love this move. So I'll go to Jake. What is your initial thoughts with this trade? I know we both welcomed in addition to the pass rush, but were you surprised at all? Is this the guy you thought they would target? Was there anyone else out there that you wanted more, or is this your guy?
I mean, when it's all said and done, I don't know if the Ravens could have done much better. I mean, we were throwing around a bunch of veteran names well over the last month or so, and none of those options really seemed as attractive as a guy like Yannick Ngakoue. And it's interesting. I mean, you referenced the fact that he's a former Terp. Is from Bowie, Maryland. Grew up a Steelers fan, according to the Ravens website, which I found a little insulting considering he's from Bowie. But I'm not going to hold it against him because obviously he's a Raven now and he's wanted to be here in the past. I mean, the Ravens were heavily scouting him all throughout his time at Maryland. They were interested in trading for him even when he was with the Jaguars. And they even, from what I understand, tried to get him this past offseason before the Vikings scooped in and got him. So they've always been interested in his services. He's only 25. And you look at what they gave up, a third round pick. Okay. Third round picks recently for the Ravens could be, guys like Orlando Brown or Mark Andrews, Miles Boykin to name another, or they could turn out to be guys like, Jalen Ferguson, Chris Wormley, Tim Williams, Bronson Konfusi, most of those guys not even on the team anymore. So when you stack that up against a 25-year-old who's guaranteed to be productive for you, I mean, he's been productive ever since he's been in the league. You're basically guaranteeing yourself an opportunity to improve your defense. One, because the pass rush was one of the biggest needs on the team, definitely the biggest need on defense. And then you're giving yourself a chance to sign him to a long-term deal after the season, because I just don't think that the Ravens are going to be looking at doing the same to Matt Judon at this point, based on what we've seen. However, the addition of Ngakoue could absolutely help Judon get less attention and increase his sack total. But we know that Matt Judon isn't a frontline, number one pass rusher that you're willing to dish out $50-60 million to, like some of these teams around the league are. So I'm happy with the move. I think it increases, it helps the team. We talked about giving up a third round pick. You mentioned they'll probably get one back when a player to be named later is going to be leaving. And then they also gave up a conditional 5th round pick as well, which is an even lower round than all those guys that I just mentioned there. So I think it gives Wink some more options. Maybe they won't have to send nearly as many guys. I certainly think that his chemistry with Calais Campbell, as those guys were both with Jacksonville as recent as last year, definitely helps, gives him a familiar face and a future Hall of Famer, arguably, in Campbell to work alongside and get this defense under his belt. But just like they did last season, they made a move to improve their defense that was already doing pretty good, among the top units in the league. And I think this certainly makes them much more formidable when it comes to rushing the quarterback for the rest of the season.
Yeah, so let's get into exactly how it helps. And you kind of mentioned it there. They don't have to draw up the creative blitzes just to get to the quarterback. In the past, I know I've been very vocal. I expressed that I really like Wink and his blitz schemes. I think it's been essential to them being a top 5 defense the past 2 years since he took over. I expect it to continue, but the difference is, and I've kind of come to realize this through talking to people about this trade, the Ravens won't have to rely on the creative blitz schemes just to get to the quarterback. They won't always have to stack the box and give these weird and different looks just to get to the quarterback. That is something that is really nice to sprinkle in because then it makes you even more threatening of a defense. But when you have to do that just to get to the quarterback, it does leave the door open for a really talented opposing quarterback, really talented opposing offense to take advantage of that. And we saw it with the Chiefs. I know everyone's kind of pointing to that game as the reason why they don't like not that they don't like these creative blitz schemes, but I personally like it when they send members of the secondary, whether it's a corner or a safety on the blitz. I like that. And a lot of other people don't. And that's fine. That's your opinion. But I still think that's being heavily skewed by one bad outing against Kansas City, that people are all, oh, don't send Marlon Humphrey on a blitz. I mean, okay, I hear you. He's a really good cover corner. His services might be better utilized covering a guy downfield. I think that's kind of a common sense take, but I personally like it. And maybe not Marlon Humphrey, but if you send another corner or the safeties, we've seen Deshaun Elliott up around the line a lot. He's got a couple of sacks this year, I think. So, like I said, I'm a fan of it. I expect the creativeness to continue because I think Wink knows, and everyone with half a brain knows, that creativity has been the MO of the Ravens for the past 2 years and has been a heavy contributor to getting them to finish in the top 5 in terms of defense. This year, they're number 1 in points allowed. They're farther down in terms of yards allowed, so it kind of brings them down as an overall. But they're not giving up. I mean, you look at the competition, it's not that hard to see that they're not going to give up a lot of points, but we'll get to the Steelers a little bit later, and I feel like I'm getting off on a tangent here, but just to compare, Steelers have played a pretty easy schedule as well, and they're not I don't know where they are in terms of points. So they might be number 2, but they're not number 1. So they've allowed more points than the Ravens, but they are number 1 in yards, I believe. So there's your kind of your comparison. Both are a really good defense, uh, sort of different categories. But I think the addition of Yannick will not only help the pass rush, but it can only help them continue to stop the run. They've already been pretty damn good at doing that this year. Um, it, you look at the Eagles game is probably, I want to say, their worst effort stopping the run, and they were without Brandon Williams and Derek Wolfe. They'll get both those guys back after the bye, and now you add Yannick at the trade deadline. You've got so many guys now that you can send in terms of a pass rush, and it sounds kind of trivial. It sounds like an elementary take here, but I think it does apply. It's not going to apply on every single snap, let alone every single game. But when you're an opposing offensive line and you look out at this Ravens defensive front coming at you, you can't double team all of them. I know that's really a simple take, but when you've got Ngakoue, Matt Judon, Calais Campbell as 3 established pass rushers, I'm willing to give that tag to all 3 of them. You've got to, I mean, you got to match up one on one. Like if you can't stop them one on one, you're going to have a tough day, and that doesn't even begin to include some of the role players the Ravens have. Pernell McPhee, who I think has been very underrated so far this year, can now move more towards a role player role and doesn't have to have as high of a snap total as he would if they didn't make this trade. I think that's only going to help him be consistent throughout the entire year. Tyus Bowser is a role player, but we've seen him flash at times. Jalen Ferguson continues to develop in year 2, still in a role player mode, but you got a lot of guys you can rotate in and out. And it's kind of the same argument I had with the running backs. You're going to keep guys fresh. You're going to keep giving them different looks. You got 3 established guys now instead of 2. And even if they can stop all 3 of them, which is pretty unlikely, that might open up possibilities for someone like Derek Wolfe, who doesn't have super high sack totals in his career, but now he might get through because they're so focused on these other 3 guys. Same could be said about Brandon Williams, even though he's not typically a guy that gets into the backfield a lot. So I think the possibilities are endless. I think this is a move that pretty much means the Ravens are going to finish top 5 in terms of defense again this year. And it's a move that is hopefully the missing piece that helps them, put it all together and go on a Super Bowl run.
Yeah, and it also potentially has indications and implications after this season. I mean, I talked about how the Ravens would probably, depending on how well he plays and stays injury free, of course, to getting Ngakoue into a long term contract, and that could be big. Because Judon's assuming he's going to be gone. McPhee's contract is going to be up. I believe Bowser is going to be a free agent after the season as well. So, you're looking at after this season, the pass rush being just a humongous need unless they are able to re-sign Bowser at a cheap deal. But you're looking at, only having Jalen Ferguson is your really only true outside pass rusher on the roster after this year. So I think it's a big trade that could also have implications past this season. And I think that's what the Ravens would like to do. I mean, I don't think that Ngakoue is this world beater that's going to command top value on the free agent market. I mean, he could still be very expensive. Don't get me wrong, but I don't think he's going to be, as high caliber as some of the top 4 or 5 pass rushers in the league. So it might work out in the Ravens' favor in terms of him being affordable. He's not a guy. I mean, I believe he's has gotten to double-digit sacks before in his career, and he's around double-digit sacks every single season on his stat line. So, and he already has 5 this year, so hopefully that can continue. And the Ravens, as you said, I mean, that defense, it's going to be very, very fun to watch this weekend, as we'll get into here in a little bit, watching these 2 defenses go toe-to-toe. And if the Ravens offense can adjust after the bye week. But I definitely think this makes the defense better. would I have preferred them to get a receiver or a offensive lineman over a pass rusher? Or I could argue that, but at the same time, as we'll get into soon, they did address the receiver position, and I think it's also important to continue to let Tyree Phillips, the rookie, get as many reps starting that he can this season at right guard. So, there's still time left too. I know the trade deadline is election day, I believe, so they still have a week remaining to make another move. We'll get into Dez here in a second, but I've heard some names like Julio Jones and Marvin Jones float around. So it'll be interesting to see if they decide to add on to what they've already brought in.
Yeah, so I'll just touch on that. I mean, we know DaCosta had that quote that said, "We're not done yet," or something along those lines. So that doesn't mean they're going to end up making another deal, but I think it obviously tells us that they're trying. Personally, I'm cool if they close up shop. You know, just don't give anything else away, because pass rush was the biggest need in my eyes. They filled that, and I honestly, I feel like some people might call me an apologist for the receiving core. That's fine. I mean, even if I think they're not living up to their potential, I still don't really see a huge value in adding somebody, honestly. You think about how many times this year have we complained or griped about them struggling to spread the ball around to the targets that they have. And the two guys we mainly pointed at are Willie Snead and Miles Boykin. And Miles Boykin is everyone's favorite punching bag right now. But if you ignore him, you got Willie Snead, you got Devin Duvernay, who's continuing to progress more and more and get more involved with the offense every week. There's two guys right there that can get more balls thrown their way or can be more involved in the offense. You don't need to go out and add some veteran receiver or any type of receiver, because guess what? When they get here, you're going to have to deliver them the ball. You're going to have to give them the ball. You can't just bring a guy in and only, target him once, maybe twice a game. They're already having trouble with the offensive line not being able to, be consistent enough to pass protect Lamar week to week. There's weeks where they look good, but there's weeks where they're really bad. Lamar's having trouble spreading the ball around. You bring another guy in, it's not necessarily going to solve that. It just means you have another guy who's not getting as many targets as he should. So I would say stand pat and keep your draft capital and maybe draft another guy next year, or hope that Miles Boykin figures it out and Devin Duvernay continues to improve. You go from there. But I'm not willing to give up draft picks or really anything to bring in another receiver, because that doesn't really solve anything, honestly. It's not like the guys they have are just, can't catch the ball or can't do anything right or fumbling machines or whatever. They can catch the ball, get the ball to them. And as far as adding an offensive lineman, the market's just not there. I mean, it's not like a pass rush or really any other position. When you look at it, it may be, besides quarterback, probably the position group you're least likely to see a midseason trade. They're just good offensive linemen are already at a premium. If you saw one get dealt, the market value would be extremely inflated. I think you'd be giving up way too much in terms of draft capital just to get someone midseason. So I think that's why you won't see an addition there. As far as Ngakoue and his future, this is tough for me, because I've been saying for a while now that Matt Judon won't be here next year, saying this long before this Ngakoue trade was even a thought, that Matt Judon won't be here. I think the addition of Yannick only confirms that. The Ravens, here's the dilemma, basically what I'm getting at. You bring in a guy, you give up 2 draft picks to get a guy here, even if one of those, the third rounder, ends up being offset by a comp pick when Matt Judon leaves. You spent draft capital to get this guy here. So similar to Marcus Peters last year, where you gave up a 5th round and a player with Kenny Young, at the time of making the trade, you should seemingly at least want to offer them a long-term deal. You wouldn't just bring in a guy just to be a rental. like we see in baseball sometimes at the trade deadline. Maybe that ends up being the case, but that's where the dilemma comes in because Ngakoue, in all reality, should command more money than Matt Judon. And Matt Judon's already going to command a dollar amount that's just too much for the Ravens. And that was my whole thing even before Ngakoue was here. You look at the future for the Ravens, the next 2-3 years, all these prospective free agents they have. They just got Marlon Humphrey locked up. That was a huge one to seal down. But we know Lamar, if he follows the path of Mahomes and Watson, is probably going to get his extension in the next year, 2 years from now at the latest. And who else? Ronnie Stanley is immediately on the horizon. Mark Andrews and Orlando Brown Jr. were both from the same draft class. Hollywood a year after that, but that's probably 3 years down the road, 4 years. So, yeah, I mean, there is a lot of prospective contracts on the horizon. And even if you want to offer one to Yannick, he's going to command a lot of money as a pass rusher. We know that. It's not like his market's going to come down. He's had 8 sacks every year since at least 8 every year since he's been in the league. He also has a lot of forced fumbles. He gets the ball on the ground. He's numbers way better than Matt Judon, and Matt Judon was already going to be too expensive for the Ravens, in my opinion. I think in that regard, this may end up being a trade that if they aren't able to get a long-term deal done with Ngakoue, which it's a two-way street, the Ravens may offer him something, but if he wants even more and ends up walking and he's not here next year, this may be a move in the long run that people don't look back on very favorably unless the Ravens were to win the Super Bowl. And in that case, everything's pretty much offset. You accomplish the greatest goal that you have with this trade is to help boost you and go win a Super Bowl. If they do end up winning it, I think you can excuse what may happen in the offseason if he wasn't, locked up long term. But let's say they don't win the Super Bowl. Let's say he walks in free agency. Even if you get the comp pick back, you only spent a 5th rounder. How are people still going to look at this trade favorably? I mean, giving up just a 5th rounder isn't a whole lot, but you only got him for 10 regular season games and however deep they go in the postseason. So I guess you can see the point I'm getting at here is they're in a weird dilemma.
Yeah, and I'm looking at Marcus Peters' Pro Football Reference page quickly, and because I was curious, and the Ravens extended Peters. They gave him that 3-year, $42 million contract extension before the season was even over last year, and that was just over 2 months after they had traded him or acquired him from the Rams in that Kenny Young trade, which also involved a 5th round pick. So, I mean, maybe the Ravens' goal here is to get some production out of, or hope that Ngakoue is productive throughout these next 2 months here, and maybe give him a cheaper extension that he might be more inclined to take because it'd be a hometown type discount, and he's made it. He's said before that he would like to play for the Ravens. So I think it depends on the player and what happens throughout the rest of the season. But I mean, that's also a very possible scenario there is for the Ravens to try to do that. And I mean, it is interesting. I mean, everything you just said makes sense, but at the same time, is the pass rush, especially if the cupboard's going to be bare as it's going to be, or as it looks like it's going to be after the season. I mean, think back to the Ravens. I mean, over the past few seasons, I mean, I know they've had guys like Zadarius Smith who had a breakout season and they had to, let walk after one productive year as a full-time starter. But really, I mean, the last time the Ravens had I wouldn't even consider it a dominant pass rush, but a respectable pass rush. I mean, the last time that comes to mind really would be, somewhere in the ballpark of 2014, where they had Terrell Suggs and Elvis Dumervil both, towards the back end of their careers, still being very productive. Because it's been that long, and because we've seen how much the struggling pass rush has hurt the Ravens defense in recent memory. And it hasn't been absolutely brutal, but there are well more than a handful of times I've remembered during games. And it's just like, if they could just get to the quarterback in the situation, it would make it a lot better. So maybe they'd be more willing to spend the money in that area. And we talk about Ngakoue only being 25 years old. So you can still get him to a 4 or 5 year deal, and he'd only be 30 years old by the time, that contract's up. But like you said, if they do that, then it makes things more difficult for paying, guys like Orlando Brown. I'm assuming they're not paying Stanley at this point. So Mark Andrews in that category, Lamar Jackson's coming up as well. That can make things more difficult and more tight. But I think I did read somewhere, and it was probably like just on a Bleacher Report on the app, or it might have been just on, something I saw because online. But I believe the Ravens will have, compared to the rest of the NFL next season, I think the 5th most salary cap space out of everybody. So I don't know if that helps them at all in regards to maybe getting, more contracts worked out in the relatively near future. But you're right. It's going to get very interesting over these next 2 off seasons, particularly when Lamar's rookie deal comes to an end and how the Ravens navigate through all this. I'm assuming we're going to start to see a lot more salary cap dumps, maybe some unnecessary contracts that they, may try to get rid of. But yeah, I guess what I'm looking for is, do they follow the same pattern as what they did last year, where maybe their hope is to get Ngakoue locked up on an extension before the season's even over? I guess that would be my question.
Yeah, that's a possibility, because that was a bit of a surprise when it came to Marcus Peters. I'm not saying I'm trying to get inside his head or know what type of guy he is, but it's pretty standard for football players, athletes in general, to just, when you're in that position where you're in a contract year, just get to the off season and see what offers you get. I think it was very rare for a player of Marcus Peters' caliber, who had already been an All-Pro at one point in his career, and then was, in the final weeks of his second All-Pro season, didn't know it at the time, but for him to sign early and be just slightly under market setting value, it was surprising. So I don't know if Ngakoue is going to do the same thing, because, like I said, that was pretty rare what they did with Marcus Peters last year, to get that kind of deal done mid-year. But I mean, hey, they did the same with Marlon Humphrey, and he wasn't market setting either. He was just slightly under. So who knows? Maybe you're onto something. But yeah, and the cap is an interesting thing to point out too. Although I would think if Stanley doesn't get a long-term deal, they would at the very least tag him, hit him with the franchise tag next year, and give him an extra year to draft his successor, or try to bring in, the next option at left tackle after him. Or if they're going to move Orlando over to left tackle, who's going to play right tackle? It just gives them an extra year to wiggle room. Kind of what they did with Matt Judon. They tag him because without him, like you said, you don't have really anybody besides Calais Campbell as a proven pass rusher, and you're kind of relying on these role players to step up. And they didn't draft anybody in terms of a pass rush this year, so the tag for Judon made sense.
Yeah, absolutely. The whole offensive line, picture just gets, more interesting. And the way things keep pointing to right now, I mean, my suspicion is, I mean, the franchise tag certainly is a viable option, especially after what we saw, this season with Matt Judon. Yes, it's expensive for 1 year, but it would, like you said, give them more time to figure out what the the plan is as far as drafting a replacement for him or moving Orlando over to left tackle. I mean, my suspicion would be, Orlando moves over. I mean, one, he played that position in college. So he's obviously has a lot of, experience there. But the other thing is, I mean, I'm assuming not only this year, but next year, the Ravens' first round draft pick is going to be relatively low in the first round, like on the back end of it. And a lot of teams that are, up towards the first half and at the beginning of the round are favoring positions like quarterback, pass rusher and offensive line. So I just don't know if, the Ravens are going to be in a position to take a Ronnie Stanley caliber player around numbers. I hope they're not around number 6 over the next couple of years like they were when they drafted Stanley. So that's another reason why I think it's it's more possible that they could find someone to take over at right tackle. But hey, who knows? I mean, they could draft a guy in the third round that only plays left tackle, and that could be the guy. I mean, I'm not sure, but that's just another thought that crept into my mind. Is their positioning in the first round would lead me to believe that maybe drafting a guy at right tackle might be what they end up deciding to do.
Yep, a lot of possibilities on the horizon, and that will be something they're gonna have to figure out down the road. But for now, they're competing for a Super Bowl. We know that's the goal for the immediate future, and the Ngakoue trade certainly helps that. So the next move, and this probably won't spend too much time on this because it's not official yet, but Dez Bryant was reported to be, the Ravens had interest in bringing him in for the practice squad. Again, they haven't made that official. I guess it's pending some COVID stuff and a physical. But considering the Ravens just gave him a workout a couple months ago before the season, I don't expect any major hangups there as far as a physical. COVID could be a different story, but Dez Bryant, look, we all know the name. He was with the Cowboys forever, huge profile receiver, very vocal, labeled a diva throughout his career, but certainly a very talented receiver nonetheless. Nowhere near the type of drama that you would get with Antonio Brown type of guy. But there were moments with Dez. And I mean, he's way past his prime. He's been out of the league for what, 2 years now. It's a rough journey back for him to get back into NFL shape, but he had the workout with the Ravens. Nothing came of it at the time. Here we are a couple months later. The Ravens have interest in bringing him in on the practice squad. It's a little more interesting to me because with the practice squad designation, I believe it allows for him to appear or be active on game day twice before they would have to do something with his contract and pay him more or add him to the active roster on a permanent basis. Whatever the rules are, you get kind of those two wiggle room games. So in that regard, I think it is interesting because in the event that a Ravens receiver right now, whoever it is, Hollywood, Snead, Boykin, Duvernay, has to sit out a week or two with after a COVID test, a positive one. If that were to happen, you could bring Dez Bryant up and plug him in. I think that would be an easy move to do. You'd see what you get at that point. I really don't know. It's sort of a gamble with him or where he's at physically and what he can do on the football field. I think that's his most likely route up to the NFL squad would be because of a coronavirus positive test, or heaven forbid, knock on wood, a season-ending injury to somebody. That's the only route I see him taking to make it up to be active on game day.
Yeah, I mean, what I'm equating this move to is, going to some dive bar, being pretty intoxicated and deciding to play darts. Um, you have no idea where the dart is going to go, but you just hope that it ends up, getting a bullseye or something and ends up working in your favor and then helping you win the game. Probably a bad analogy, but I mean, that's exactly what this is. This is a guy that hasn't played football in about 3 years. He was signed to the Saints, I believe 2 years ago, and ended up rupturing his Achilles, which was the last time he was really on a roster. So it's been a little bit, and yeah, I mean, it's a cheap way for the Ravens to hope to improve their receiving core. But like you said, what they're going to get out of Dez Bryant after not playing football for almost 3 seasons, like you, I'm not expecting anything. But because Dez Bryant has the resume that he does, I'm hoping for some miracle comeback story that the Ravens can get some value out of him. But that is very, I'm not expecting it, but I hope for it because the Ravens need, another receiver to be able to rely on. I mean, Lamar needs he's got the deep threat in Hollywood. He's got the speedy deep threat that can stretch the field. Can Lamar always get the ball to him accurately? We haven't seen that a lot this season. But he needs a big bodied receiver to be physical with defensive backs, go catch the football, catch it over his head, catch it over his shoulder, catch it in traffic, catch it on the sideline. He needs that big guy to do that. Boykin has the frame, but he doesn't have the ability as so far as what we've seen. He just hasn't shown that he can do it yet. He's had flashes, but hasn't done it consistently or nearly to the level that Dez Bryant's done it in the past. So I'm not expecting anything from an on-field standpoint, from a productive standpoint from Dez Bryant. However, I do think at the very least that having a veteran in there with the resume of Dez Bryant can be beneficial for guys like Miles Boykin and Devin Duvernay, particularly Miles Boykin. I mean, maybe that's another tea leaf that goes into this signing that we didn't really think about, is maybe the Ravens hope that Dez can offer Miles some advice, because the Ravens really don't have Willie Snead's a veteran guy, but he hasn't had nearly the type of success that Dez has had in the past. So if anything, if the Ravens can't get anything from Dez on the field, I just hope that he can pass along some knowledge to the young guys, and Hollywood can be thrown into that mix as well.
Yep, it'll be a wait and see type of situation, and really, I don't get kind of the argument that people are saying, oh, they brought him in for motivation, like to kick the receiving core that they have, like kick him in the rear and say, hey, you better get going. What do you mean you better get going? This guy that Dez Bryant's going to take my job, a guy that hasn't played football in 3 years? Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I'm real scared of that. Come on. I don't know. To be a mentor, sure. To guide and be a veteran presence, I can understand that. But this whole argument of, oh, you better shape up quick or Dez Bryant's going to take your job. You'd have to be really, really bad for Dez Bryant to take your job right now. I'll just say that. Let's get to the Steelers preview, because that's the big topic of the week. Looking ahead, Steelers are 6-0, Ravens are 5-1. Going to be a huge matchup. Big implications in terms of who wins the division. Will rest on these two games between the Ravens and Steelers this year. First one is this Sunday in Baltimore, down the road. Ravens will have to go there on a short week on Thanksgiving. So right off the bat, I'm not going to label this a must-win game, because typically we give that label out when your back's against the wall and you might have a losing record and you got to salvage something late in the season. But knowing that the Steelers are 6-0 right now, and quite frankly, I didn't expect them to be undefeated through 6 weeks. I would have thought they would have lost somewhere along the line, even though their schedule is relatively easy. And they're threatening the Ravens for a division title. I mean, that's just the fact. So when it's all said and done, whoever wins this division, it might be by just a game. And at that point, it comes down to these two matchups that, you're going to face off against each other. To get back to the must-win point, I won't call it a must-win game, but you got to look down the road and see that, hey, the next time we face the Steelers, it's going to be a short week. We're going to be the road team, and it's going to be, this big primetime nationally televised game on Thanksgiving night. Last time the Ravens played the Steelers on a holiday, they got a heartbreaking loss delivered to them on Christmas. Don't even want to begin to think about that, but it is important to note that these teams faced off on Thanksgiving in 2013. The Ravens were the winner in that one, although that game was played at M&T Bank Stadium. So it's very, very important that the Ravens win this game. That way your back is not against the wall on Thanksgiving. You can go into that matchup with house money, so to speak. If you win this one, you go into the Thanksgiving game and you say, look, we already got the win. We're going for the sweep. This would be huge for us, but if we lose this one, it's okay. We split. We're still okay. But if you lose this one this Sunday to the Steelers, you're going to be in trouble. Now you have to win, because there's no way you can't get swept by Pittsburgh. If you get swept by Pittsburgh, they'll win the division. That's my guess. So a lot is riding on this game. You can say that the Steelers got a little lucky this past Sunday. They can thank Gostowski for another miss. Steelers undefeated nonetheless. They escaped that one. Give them credit. They played a great game early on. Titans stormed back. They're a great team as well. So you had to think that this one was going to be close at some point late in the game, and it was. But Steelers early on looked really good. Offense was marching up and down the field. Big Ben commanding that offense. He looks honestly as good as ever, at least as good as he's looked in many, many years. I'm going to say 5, 4 or 5 years, this might be the best he's looked. He's healthy. That's certainly a huge factor. And he might not have Antonio Brown and Le'Veon Bell with him, but he's got some pretty good weapons. We know what Juju can do. Chase Claypool has come on strong. They've always got receivers every year. They've always got receivers coming in and out that they're going to hit on, that are going to be productive. That's just kind of what we've come to expect from the Steelers at this point. They got a good team. They got a really good team, and I haven't even talked about the defense yet. So they are top of the league in a lot of ways. Lead the league in sacks as well. So they present probably the toughest challenge the Ravens could have at this point in the season. You're coming out of a bye as an offense. You have a lot of things that you want to correct and start firing on all cylinders. And your first task out of the bye is the Steelers defense, who has, not allowed a lot of yards, has gotten after the quarterback on a consistent basis this year. Tall task for the offensive line, tall task for Lamar Jackson and this receiving core. Just a huge, huge task all around for this offense. And that's kind of the key that I'm looking at, is how much of a difference do we see in the Ravens offense, and how much should we really expect given who they're going up against?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, that's going to be the most interesting thing to see, is how this offense, uh, and you look at the stats too. I mean, the offense as a whole is still doing very well. And Lamar, in some statistical categories, I think former Ravens media reporter Sarah Ellison shared something that a friend had sent me, that she put on her Twitter, about a lot of Lamar's stats are actually better a little bit than in terms of I can't remember exactly what the stats were. I wish I had them in front of me, but anyone that wants to see it can go check it out. I think she had like quoted a Pro Football Focus feature on Lamar or something like that. But yeah, hands down, the Ravens offense going against the Steelers defense is going to be what we're going to be looking at. And, John Harbaugh's teams historically coming out of byes perform very well. And obviously, last year they had a big game against New England coming out of the bye and dominated them on Sunday Night Football. So yeah, this is a huge game aside from the Chiefs game. Definitely the biggest game the Ravens have had so far this season. I'm very happy that some fans are going to be able to go see the game in person, and I'm sure that'll be a huge boost for the Ravens to perform in some amount of their home crowd for the first time this season. But yeah, both these defenses are very formidable. I think it comes down to, who makes less mistakes on offense and who doesn't turn the ball over. Because I think both teams are gonna turn the ball over. So it's gonna come down to who does it less. And it'd be very great to see, this Ravens pass rush that's now boosted with Ngakoue come alive and be able to get to Big Ben. We all know that he's capable of extending plays, but he's not the guy that it moves around like he used to. He can still do it, but he's just not as speedy as he once was. He still mixes the ball around a lot. There's a lot of quick plays now, but he also gets it down the field just as well as anybody in the league. Still, it's quite amazing, especially coming off the elbow surgery, what he's been able to do. But yeah, this is crucial. I don't know. I just have this. I don't know why I think this, and I wouldn't consider this a hot take. I think it's a funny feeling I have. I have this gut feeling that the Steelers are going to win this week, but the Ravens will take the Thanksgiving game in Pittsburgh for some reason. I don't know why I think that. I can't tell you why. I don't know. Maybe the Ravens, lose the game before Tennessee and get all pissed off and go on the road and get the win in Pittsburgh. I just don't know. They've played well in Pittsburgh the last few seasons, the last 2 seasons. So, but it's also exciting considering that, as we mentioned last week, this is the first time that Lamar Jackson and Ben Roethlisberger will be facing each other as starting quarterbacks. But what we wanted to happen in the Tennessee game, I was actually hoping the Steelers would win that game because I wanted them to come into Baltimore all riding high, undefeated, instead of coming in angry after a loss and being ready to kick some butt. But yeah, and I know it works in the Ravens' favor. I know they have the bye. I know they have the home field, but the Steelers are just playing so great right now. And I think this is just going to be an ugly, low-scoring game that the Steelers are going to edge out at the end. I don't know why, but I'm picking Pittsburgh to win. Give me, let's say 23-20. So not like terribly low scoring, but not nearly as high as what we normally see the Ravens put up.
All right, before I get to my prediction, I get some breaking news here. Ian Rappaport said the Ravens are signing Dez Bryant to the practice squad. It is official now, so you can there you go. Our whole conversation there was not pointless. So it's an official move. He's on the practice squad. But getting back to the Steelers game, it could be low scoring, and I think in my prediction here, I'll just say I have the Ravens 27, Steelers 20. Maybe that's a little high. Relatively low scoring here. I think the defenses will stick to their MO and continue to be dominant. You know, I still stand by that this is, from the Ravens' perspective, more about how their offense performs coming out of the bye against a really good Steelers defense. But conversely, the Ravens' defense has been fantastic, and you now have the Yannick addition. How much does he play on Sunday? I mean, I know he's on pace or should be starting practicing tomorrow, but based on, learning the playbook and everything, how involved is he going to be? I would expect that he's going to be used in some capacity. He'll be active for sure, whether they just use him on third down, on rushing downs, or whatever. I expect him to have at least some impact on the game. I'm not going to say he's going to have like 2 sacks and a forced fumble or anything, but it would be pretty cool if, kind of like last year when they brought in Marcus Peters, Yannick makes an instant impact and has a sack like Peters had the interception against the Seahawks. That would be pretty cool. But yeah, I think the Ravens win 27-20, but we'll leave it at that. That's episode 125. I don't know how long that ended up being, maybe closer to an hour than I thought. But we will be talking about this game next week. Whatever happens, hopefully a win for the Ravens, but we'll have a recap for you next week, and we'll talk to you then.